with Alison Camerata and John Berman.
Not really.
You good with this whole thing?
You know, the show starts when the show starts, whether I'm ready or not, I've noticed.
It's only 3 hours. Don't worry, it'll go like that. Welcome to our viewers in the United States and all around the world. This is New Day. It's Tuesday, December 11th, 6 o'clock here in New York. Today kicks off days and days of legal proceedings and key events surrounding the Russia investigation and the illegal campaign payments to cover up alleged affairs investigation, which frankly needs a better name. But by any name, it is clear the president believes it is all a real threat. A source tells CNN President Trump thinks it's a real possibility he could be impeached. Of course, that's an effort that would be driven by House Democrats. But beyond that, it isn't clear the president has much to fear from Congress, because even with the mounting evidence that the president could very likely face indictment were he not president, even with the mounting evidence that 16 Trump associates had contact with Russians during the campaign or transition, even with the specter of a Mueller report, which could expose even more, even with all of that, key Republicans, especially in the Senate, are saying, meh, which is a legal term for we don't give a hoot. Senator Orrin Hatch even went as far as to say, okay, but I don't care. All I can say is he's doing a good job as president. So those are the current senators. 44 former senators, including some Republicans, are sounding the alarm. In a Washington Post op-ed, they warn we are entering a dangerous period, and they urge current senators to put the country ahead of partisanship.
We will talk to one of them about that. Meanwhile, accused Russian spy Maria Butina is set to change her plea tomorrow. A source tells CNN she is now cooperating with federal prosecutors. They say Butina cozied up to powerful figures like the NRA to push Russian interests, even asking then-candidate Trump a question at a campaign event in 2015 that now looks different when we replay it. Her appearance in court is one of several events this week that could shed new light on the Russia investigation. So today, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn will ask a judge for no jail time in his sentencing memo. And there's a hearing in Paul Manafort's federal case as prosecutors explain the lies that they say torpedoed his plea deal. Then tomorrow, Michael Cohen will learn his sentence for his campaign finance and business crimes in New York. And if all of that is not enough, we have breaking news. There is a new CNN poll on President Trump and Robert Mueller and whether Americans believe the Russia investigation will implicate the president in wrongdoing. So let's get right to CNN political director David Chalian in our Washington bureau with our new poll numbers hot off the presses. David.
Good morning, Allison. Let me just give you the headline here. These numbers are not going in the direction President Trump would like to see. His handling of the Russia investigation is back to an all-time low in our polling. Only 29% of Americans approve of the way President Trump is handling the investigation. 57% disapprove. Take a look at this over time, and you'll see it had ticked up a little bit recently. 33% approval in October, 30% in September. He's back down to where he was in the spring in June. And again, that is a record low point. Now, none of these numbers are good. It's always one of the worst issues tested for him. Take a look when you look at it by party. I find this fascinating. The big movement is among Republicans. He's lost about 17% support here in approval of his handling the investigation. Only 51% of Republicans now approve of the way Donald Trump is handling the investigation. Not a ton better news for Robert Mueller. Let's take a look at his approval rating on this investigation. 43% approve, 40% disapprove. If you look over time, he also is trending in the wrong direction. In October, he was at 48. In September, he was 50. He's back down to a near low point back in the spring. So perhaps suggesting the country overall may be tiring of this. And in fact, if you look at the party breakdown for Bob Mueller, guys, he's down 10 points among independents who approve of the way he's doing his job. I think that may be something he keeps in mind as he wraps this up. You mentioned, will this all implicate the president in wrongdoing? About half the country thinks it will, according to this brand new poll by SSRS. But take a look at this. Nearly a quarter of Republicans think that Mueller is likely to implicate Trump in wrongdoing. Independents split about evenly. Finally, how is this all impacting Donald Trump's overall approval rating? He's back down at 39% job approval, 52% disapprove. If you look here, this is about where he was right before the midterm election. And a year ago, he wasn't that far away at 35%. When you're in the high 30s, and you've got this kind of cloud swirling over you, this is not where any president would want to be at this moment in their presidency, guys.
David Chalian, that's exactly right. He's at 39% at the beginning of a week, or what could be weeks of event after event after event in this Russia investigation. David Chalian in Washington, we really appreciate it. Want to bring in CNN senior political reporter Nia Malika Henderson, CNN senior political analyst John Avlon, and CNN legal analyst Elie Honig. He's a former federal prosecutor who has argued cases before the judge who will sentence Michael Cohen. If we can put up the calendar, and I think it's fascinating, you know, as sands through the hourglass, so go the days of our Russia investigation. I mean, it's one thing after another. The Flynn sentencing memo, he gets to file his argument, a hearing on Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen is sentenced, prosecutors reply to Flynn's sentencing memo, and then we have this mystery hearing, which I don't even know if we're going to have time to talk about. We don't know what they're going to be arguing on the 12th here. But Elie, as you look at all of this, and we already know an awful lot, what more information do you expect to learn this week?
Yeah, I think we're going to learn a lot more. Michael Flynn, let's not sleep on Michael Flynn. Everyone's focused on Cohen and Manafort, right? The sentencing memo that Mueller put in last week showed that Michael Flynn gave important information. He was a little vague. There was a lot of redactions, right? But he gave information to Mueller on collusion, coordination between the campaign and Russia. And we could learn more about that.
But why would that be in his sentencing memo? He would say, here's what I did. He might reveal that.
When a defendant is putting in his sentencing memo, he wants to make the best possible case to the judge. I've given important, serious cooperation to the feds. You get a benefit for that. He gets a 5K. So yeah, he's going to want to go into as much depth as he can without crossing lines of confidentiality and grand jury secrecy. So we will see what additional detail is in Flynn's memo today. Manafort, if that results in a hearing, we're going to learn more about the ways that he lied, who he was looking to protect. Most interesting to me is that Manafort had these bizarre, inexplicable contacts with White House senior officials as late as this year, into 2018. So we could learn more about that. So there's a lot of sort of threatening forces. Michael Cohen sentencing tomorrow. We could learn yet more about all the information Cohen has given. So the public record is building. We still don't know what Mueller knows. We may never know, but every day we're learning more and more, and I think you can see the picture coming together.
I mean, yeah, we don't know what Mueller knows, but we know some things. I mean, we know some things now that we didn't know perhaps a week ago. I mean, we know that there were 16 people in the Trump orbit, close advisors that had contacts with Russians, many of whom forgot about those and didn't disclose those for whatever reason. So that starts to form a fuller picture of something not quite right. And yes, did you have a point about what else we know?
All of them forgot, basically. I mean, we're dealing with mass amnesia when it comes to dealing with the Russians.
And the one other, I think, big headline is that Mueller believes that individual one, Donald Trump directed Michael Cohen to break the law, campaign finance.
Yeah, and that was the big revelation this past week. And we had some hint of that from Cohen in his testimony in court, but then to see it in the filings there, that individual one was the person who directed this, essentially directed Michael Cohen to pay these women off, to shut them up before the election. And you have the president trying to sort of dismiss this and say, oh, this is something that Obama did during his campaign. It was completely different. We'll see. I mean, one of the things that's fascinating in these poll numbers is to see the shift in Republicans in terms of how they think the president is handling this. It was 68%, I believe, in October. It's 51% now. That is a massive dip in terms of how they see this president handling this. And we know how he's handling it, right? He's tweeting constantly about it. He's calling it a witch hunt. He's saying it should end. He's saying that Mueller is biased and all of the angry Democrats who are surrounding him are biased. We'll see if they change their strategy, if they're able to sort of change the minds of Republicans who seem to be in some ways bailing on him in terms of how he's handling this.
I don't know if they're bailing so much. If you've listened to Orrin Hatch.
Yeah, but he's bailing, right? I mean, he's retiring,
well, he's retiring,
right?
But the other guys are really, there's a collective, like, I don't really care about this. I mean, you want me to do a dramatic reading from John Kennedy? John, he's talking about Michael Cohen. He says, Jesus loves him, but everyone else thinks he's an idiot, is what he says of Michael Cohen.
You didn't do it in his folkloric Southern patois.
I do. We have a détente right now, and I want to upset him with my Louisiana accent. But I also want to play for you a short version of what Orrin Hatch, again, who is retiring, says about all these revelations that are coming to light. Let's listen to Orrin Hatch.
I don't think he was involved in crimes, but even then, you know, you can make anything a crime under the current laws. if you want to, you can blow it way out of proportion. You can do a lot of things.
Yeah, and he also went on to say, John, I don't care. All I can say is he's doing a good job as president. I mean, Orrin Hatch is saying, I don't care.
I don't care. That's sad for Orrin Hatch to leave the Senate after a distinguished career on this kind of a note, because this eviscerates a basic principle of justice, which is that a Republican crook's the same as a Democratic crook, that you do care if you're in a co-equal branch of government, if a president is accused of breaking the law. And the hypocrisy, of course, is particularly stunning when you look at how people like Orrin Hatch and Republicans dealt with Bill Clinton. And now, while the White House is embracing, on the one hand, a what me worry strategy and hoping that Republicans will just say it doesn't matter what the facts are, reports are the president's actually concerned about impeachment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you get these two colliding forces right now, because all the arguments that Republicans who are still left indignantly used against Bill Clinton for impeachment now are magically no longer apply.
You know, we actually have one of those. We might as well put up on the screen from someone who knows Orrin Hatch, is familiar with his thinking. Orrin Hatch. Right? This is what Orrin Hatch said in 1999 about Clinton. Committing crimes of moral turpitude, such as perjury and obstruction of justice, go to the heart of qualification for public office. These offenses were committed by the chief executive of our country, the individual who swore to faithfully execute the laws of the United States.
Source close to Orrin Hatch was right back then. Look, this is the situational ethics that makes people sick about Washington. But frankly, when you're a senator of this kind of long-standing, you should hold yourself to a little bit higher standard than that kind of sleazy hyper-partisanship that excuses whatever a president of your party does. Hatch was basically right then in terms of the standards that should be applied to the president, and he's dead wrong now. But you're going to see that situational ethics flip. But the president realizes this is bearing down, that this is getting real. Now, whether, you know, his payoffs to the women in the closing days of the campaign rise to a impeachment standard is one of the many debates we'll be having. But you got to love the fact that after months and months of denials, now it's a simple private transaction, folks.
And you do hear Democrats sounding a different note at this point. Jerry Nadler, slightly different, talking about impeachment, saying that this did rise to the level of impeachment. Still this idea of whether or not it quite rises to the level of impeachment, meaning removing him from office. So you wonder if there's going to be pressure from the grassroots of Democrats, essentially, saying that, you know, you've got to move forward with impeachment.
Sure, but then nothing would happen in the Senate.
Right, in the Senate.
And that leads us to this legal loophole where the statute of limitations could pass.
Right.
So the president could be impeached by Democrats if they were to choose that route.
Right.
And then let's say that he's reelected. Then the statute of limitations passes, and there are no legal repercussions.
Yeah, most statutes of limitations under federal law are 5 years. So if he wins in 2020, 2024, that's 8 years in.
And that's new motivation to win.
Right.
It could become a political selling point, right? And
or to vote against him. I mean, if you're
it could be either way. But you know, there's this question that John and Nia were talking about: is this enough to impeach? Right? Let's focus just on the campaign finance piece. I mean, John read the quote. Clinton was impeached over crimes of moral turpitude. Campaign finance, it goes to the heart of the process, the political process that landed Donald Trump in the White House. It's much more relevant to the office of the presidency than the things that Bill Clinton did, lying in his civil deposition.
It's also connected to moral turpitude, by the way. The payments were connected.
It is morally
turpitudinous.
And just imagine for a second if Bill Clinton had been found to have paid off two women in the closing weeks of the 1992 campaign. The chorus of indignation from the Orrin Hatches and the David Bossies of the world. And they wouldn't have been wrong.
I have to also say, and you know this, John, we all know this, being elected by corrupt means is one of the areas that the framers intended impeachment to be used. They talked about this out loud. There are records of the discussion. So this isn't that far afield of what they intended. Whether or not Democrats think they should do it, I'm actually, you know, our reporting, I think Jim Acosta has done great reporting on this. The president says he's concerned about impeachment. It's not clear to me that he's genuinely concerned that Democrats do this, or he's floating this out there like he was in the campaign to rile up his base. I mean,
because we did hear that before. You know, before the election in November, this idea that you can't elect House Democrats because they would impeach him. So it's unclear as to why they're doing it. They clearly want this story out there that he's thinking about impeachment. What would that mean? So, but it is unclear as to whether or not it's just to rile up his base and galvanize some of these people who at this point don't think he's handling the Russia investigation well.
Ellie, when people say, well, Barack Obama did this, no, he didn't.
Right.
Very different.
He did not pay off porn stars that he'd had an affair with. No, he didn't.
Different in a lot of ways.
top line level.
No, that did not happen.
Right.
But when people say he had campaign finance violations, what does it mean?
Obama was completely different. He just failed to fill out essentially certain paperwork. It was an administrative violation. It was pointed out. His people remedied it, and that was that. It's a completely different situation. And what's really different here, and Nia mentioned this, my old office, the Southern District of New York, went on record in writing and said there is now evidence that Michael Cohen committed these campaign finance crimes for and at the direction of the president. And as soon as I got that memo, I said, are they going to vouch for this? Because I come from that office, and there is no way on this earth that the Southern District would make that representation to a judge in writing based solely on the say-so of Michael Cohen. It tells me they have more. They have hard evidence proving that. So now, what will become of it politically is a different question. Will it be enough for impeachment?
Yeah.
I don't know. Different Congress people say different things. But it's a huge step to have the United States Department of Justice commit in writing to a federal judge implicating a president in a federal crime.
And it wasn't just Cohen paying Stormy Daniels. Don't forget, they had the National Enquirer, American Media. They went through a company, a shell organization, essentially, to make this happen. And then they doctored the accounting after the fact.
Right. And people have said, well, Trump's defense has sort of vacillated from I didn't know to I did know, but it was totally normal and fine. But then I asked, why the shell companies? And why is everyone lying about this? Why is Trump lying about this? I mean, the lies are just so telling.
Because tone comes from the top. The litany of lies that is the first defense of this organization and this president on this subject all falls apart. And we just see it over and over again in the entire story of the Russia investigation. Denials fall apart in the face of facts, and then they try to normalize it.
I think the Orrin Hatch moment is really helpful, actually.
Yeah.
I appreciate his candor. I think it's really helpful because when Democrats, so many Democrats who are wringing their hands, now Republicans will see the light. Finally, Republicans, when they have this hard evidence where it shows that Donald Trump directed this to try to sway the campaign, now they'll see the light. No.
Well, I would be
basically, I just want one last point. They like what he's doing. They like what he's doing as president. And that's the end of the story. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think Orrin Hatch is in a different position because he is retiring. He's got a couple of more days left in Congress, and he'll go back home to Utah. It would be interesting to see if people like Susan Collins, right, who is literally up for re-election in 2020, if people like that would on camera say the same kind of thing, that, oh, this doesn't really matter, he's a good president, we don't care if he's
total abdication of their basic responsibility to uphold the Constitution. Let's not monkey around here. This is about we're a nation of laws or men.
So far, she says we have to get all the facts. I've not reviewed the filings that you've referred to. It doesn't seem like she has,
it doesn't get stronger than that.
And this is where moderates get a bad name for being, the mushy middle and wishy-washy. But this is basic, folks. Yeah. This is not something where folks can say, oh, it's cool, nothing matters, and what if it did? He's the president of our party and the economy's doing fine. This is about basic responsibilities of the office and the oath they've taken.
Can I ask very quickly, Ellie, because it's not often I have such an accomplished lawyer sitting next to me professionally at least. Knowingly and willfully. Yeah. That's the standard the president would need to be convicted of this campaign finance crime. Right. That he knowingly and willfully violated the campaign finance law. He had to know that this law existed.
Yeah, so that I think they're trying to distort that a bit too. The president doesn't have to have been able to recite chapter and verse on the campaign finance law. There's 5 people in the entire country who can do that. What they have to show is that the president knew his acts were wrong and unlawful. So that's the level of knowledge. And again, look at the Shell Corporation. If you didn't know it was wrong and unlawful, why the Shell Corporation? Yeah, look at the lies. So that's the kind of argument I'd be making in court. But look, there's a fair argument to be made both ways there. It's a tough one for prosecutors.
Is defense, though?
Well, only to an extent, right? It's not, if he says, look, I didn't know the subsection of the details of the campaign finance law. That's not what prosecutors have to show. What they have to show is that he had bad state of mind, corrupt intent.
Ellie, Nia, John, thank you very, very much. A source tells CNN that President Trump is, quote, super pissed about the chief of staff mess. The mad scramble to find someone to do the top job inside the White House. The latest frontrunners for the job, next.
One source describes President Trump as angry.
It wasn't angry. The quote was, look, I'm not advocating this kind of language, but the actual quote is super pissed.
Okay, I was trying to avoid saying that over morning television. As you know, I can be a little rhetorically prudish on TV.
Only rhetorically.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And only on TV. Okay, this all comes after Mr. Trump's top pick, Nick Ayers, turned down the chief of Staff job. Why is it so hard to fill this position? Let's bring back John Avlon and Nia Malika Henderson, along with CNN political director David Chalian. Nia,
it's a terrible job. It is a terrible job, more so because of the president, because he's so undisciplined. He loves the chaos. Oh, as well, his daughter and son-in-law work in the White House. So you got to, kind of manage those folks. You got to figure out if they're going around you. So yeah, I mean, it is a rolling dumpster fire of an atmosphere for anyone to want to work there. Oh, and not only that, you might have to have a lawyer on retainer because of the Mueller investigation that's swirling around this White House. So all of these folks, yesterday around this time, people were pulling their names off the list, right? Basically saying absolutely not. That was Meadows. And now you have a sense where, well, they're trying to, kind of at least acknowledge maybe this would be a good job, kind of play nice with the president. Still unlikely, I think, that a lot of those folks are on the list actually want the job and will take it. We'll see.
One of the reasons I think the president is angry,
thank you,
as you would like to say, David Chalian, is that the reporting on the story has gone from bad to worse for the president. You have both the New York Times and the Washington Post reporting overnight that the president had no plan B. The exact same quote, no plan B, after Nick Ayers. One of the stories said that the president was left at the altar by Nick Ayers. I mean, this is tough stuff for a president. Oh, my one other favorite thing is that one of the reasons the president liked Nick Ayers all along is because he looked like Donald Trump as a young man.
That's right. He does look like Donald Trump. Yes, he does.
More so or less so than
we're
he
going to do a
looked
split
like
screen.
But we digress. The bottom line, David, is that I can see where the president's upset about how this is being covered, which is not to say he doesn't bear the majority of responsibility for how it got to this point.
I would say more than the majority, almost entirely. But yeah, I mean, listen, Nick Ayers gets the best of both worlds here. The world knows that Donald Trump wanted him for chief of staff, and now he doesn't have to have the headache of actually being Donald Trump's chief of staff. But there's no doubt that any president would be angry to have himself sort of just hanging out there, publicly announcing that he got rid of the other guy, but not having a plan locked down to unveil and roll out. Here's the problem, though. We spend a lot of time dissecting and thinking about and talking about, all the president's men and the people that he puts around him and his staff. But there has been no presidency that has been as solely concentrated in the person sitting in the Oval Office in terms of its personality in modern times as much as this one. And so why would anybody want this job? What is the chief of staff in a Donald Trump White House? It's not some job that's going to be a huge resume builder. It's certainly not a job where you're going to be able to bring order to the White House and the way the government works, because the president doesn't want order to the White House and the way the government works.
The Wall Street Journal put a finer point on that. Let me just read this. That left-leaning rag said this morning: there are many unpleasant jobs in the world, but somebody's got to do them. One is being Donald Trump's chief of staff. And so as he prepares to be liberated from the White House bondage this month, John Kelly deserves the nation's gratitude. Wow.
That's the editorial board.
Yeah, that's the editorial page. Look, I think everyone should be thanked for their service, because this is an administration where some people are serving at the risk of their reputation. Normally, the chief of staff's a reputation maker. This is a reputation taker. Famously, Ken Duberstein was chief of staff to Reagan for 2 months and has an incredibly successful career dining off that. Normally, that's the way of things. This is instead the opposite. This is the reverse Midas touch. No one wants to go near the job because it's seen as so thankless, because there's a reason why you shouldn't have children and sons-in-laws serving in the West Wing. It becomes a thankless process. But the serious point is this. Yes, this president is uniquely self-centered in defining his administration. We've also never had a president with this much executive time, by which I mean there's actually plenty for the nation's business for a chief of staff to do. So it really is an important job. It's not simply Kremlinology and wallpapering. The fact that there is no plan B, the fact that Nick Ayers basically seems to have almost played the president in terms of reputation enhancement and mitigation of disaster, personally, indicates the problem. It's another depth of the Captain Chaos approach to the Oval Office that doesn't serve the nation's business well. And given the seas that this administration is heading into, even rockier times ahead, folks.
You wanted to put up, let's just quickly, I want to show some of the names being discussed. I'm not sure it will reduce the Captain Chaos aspect of this. Mick Mulvaney, who's in the administration right now, Steve Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary Mark Meadows, head of the Freedom Caucus, Robert Lighthizer, Trade Representative Chris Christie. I wouldn't bet on that. Matt Whitaker also. And then David Bossie, who was a Politico insider for a long time, was big in Whitewater and whatnot. Look, we don't know who it's going to be. We can handicap which way or not. David, we're talking about the nation's business, though. Coming up later today, there is a key moment in the nation's business, which is that Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, and Nancy Pelosi, who will be, we think, the House Speaker coming in, are going to meet with the president to discuss this budget deal or vote. I say deal, there's no deal, about what might happen. How do you see this meeting playing out, David?
Right. So we're getting to that point where the rubber's going to hit the road on how much money the president is asking for his border wall in terms of funding in exchange for funding the rest of the government, getting his signature on a bill there. And the Democratic leaders are going to go in and say, you're only getting this much money for the border wall, and you need our votes to pass a spending bill. So we're going to learn here what that magic number will be. But what I find so interesting about this dynamic right now, Chuck Schumer's in the same job that he's going to be in next year. But Nancy Pelosi is going into this meeting, not yet, although, as you said, we presume that she is going to be the speaker, but not yet does she have 218 declared votes all locked down. She's still doing the business of wooing her members and making sure they feel good about making her speaker, which is going to impact her ability to really negotiate with the president here to some extent.
Nia, our reporting is that they are willing to offer President Trump $1.3 billion to build the border wall. Why are they capitulating? I mean, he said that Mexico was going to pay for it.
Yeah, that's right. That was a campaign promise, and he hasn't talked about that in a while. It had been, I believe, Chuck Schumer talked about $1.5 billion at one point.
1.6.
$6 billion, and so
was
now
for
it's
a fence. It's 1.3 for a fence.
Yeah,
but
and so
call it
they're
a fence, wall,
moving
whatever you want. But I mean, they're giving him money.
Yeah, they're giving, and you're right. I mean, if you're a grassroots Democrat, you don't want any money given to that wall. I mean, his whole problem has always been that Republicans don't even really want this wall. We'll see what comes out of these talks today. As we have known from these sort of Chuck and Nancy Trump summits before, something will come out, and then a day later it'll change based on a tweet from the president. So we'll see.
Strangest form of after-dinner theater, dinner with Chuck and Nancy. Here's the deal, though. We got a real deadline coming down, folks. December 21st. We got a potential shutdown, and we know what the parameters are, right? Democrats say they're offering over $1 billion for fence. It's concession against their base's wishes. Freedom Caucus is saying if it's not $5 billion for the wall, we're not doing anything. So is the president going to try to use his political capital to create a deal, build something big, and not shut down the government with unified Republican control? Or are we going to go careening off the cliff again?
Stay tuned for our next episode.
That's right.
John, David, Nia, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Another major blow for Theresa May's Brexit plan. What will happen now? We have all of the breaking details for you next.
We have breaking news. The head of the European Commission says there is, quote, no room whatsoever for renegotiation of Brexit. This comes as the British Prime Minister Theresa May is in Brussels for talks after postponing the vote that was to be today on the deal to exit the European Union. So what now? CNN's Bianca Nobilo live at 10 Downing Street in London with all the breaking details. Bianca.
Thanks, John. Yes, the Prime Minister is in a very difficult predicament. She's going on this whistle-stop tour this morning to meet with European leaders to see if there is any wiggle room whatsoever to improve her Brexit deal. This comes after she called off a historic vote on her Brexit deal that was meant to be today. She announced that to the House of Commons yesterday to a raucous response from her own party, who attacked her, and from the opposition, who also attacked her as well. Now, one thing is for sure. The Prime Minister has now defined herself on this Brexit plan, so she's synonymous with it. If it fails, she will fail too, and her leadership is in a very delicate position as well. So one thing is for sure, her plan is on life support, so is her premiership, and even just this morning there were more rumours that a vote of no confidence is imminent in the Prime Minister from her backbenchers that don't like the deal that she's struck with the European Union. But it doesn't look likely that the EU has any room to give her some more concessions on this. So what does the Prime Minister do then? Well, she can try and take the deal back to the House of Commons, but it's so unlikely to pass. So then the United Kingdom is faced with this binary choice of maybe crashing out with no deal, or perhaps even that option of a second referendum. Alison?
Oh my gosh, Bianca, do not move, because it sounds like there will be a lot of breaking news and bring us all the developments as they happen. Thank you very much. Well, the southern U.S. is digging out of heavy snow, and another winter storm is on the way. CNN meteorologist Chad Myers has our forecast. What are you seeing, Chad?
The next winter storm for Thursday, Friday will definitely be a rainmaker, and that could be a problem for the weight of the snow on some of the roofs that are down here across parts of the South. Might even have a foot and a half of snow on them, and all of a sudden that gets very wet. The problem this morning is everywhere that we did have snow over the weekend is now down below 32. Yesterday, up to about 40. So melting thaw, freezing spots, icy spots all over the southeast right now. This weather is brought to you by the Shark Ion Robot Cleaning System. One dock, two sharks. So let's get to it. Where does it go? Where does this system go from here? From the northeast, the storm is moving away. Here's Thursday. Could be some severe weather, not that far from Houston or even for New Orleans. But the problem is how much heavy rainfall is going to come down here. Probably gutters are going to be clogged with snow in some spots. Leaves still clogging the gutters in other spots. So we're expecting flash flooding here. Some of the areas across the southeast could pick up 4 inches of rainfall before it finally all stops. New York, though, John, you warm up. I know there'll be some showers. You get to 50 on Saturday.
Ooh.
That's going to feel like springtime.
Nice.
I like it. All right, Chad, thank you very much. So, new this morning, the Washington Post was finding so many falsehoods, so many lies repeated so often that they just decided to create a whole new category of fact-checking. The bottomless Pinocchio.
What does that mean?
Bottomless Pinocchio. Are they talking about pants? That's next.
Your new day weather is...
So the fact checkers at the Washington Post say that President Trump has repeated so many false claims that they've been forced to introduce a new category. They're calling it the bottomless Pinocchio. Joining us now was the Washington Post fact checker columnist Glenn Kessler. Glenn, thank you so much for being with us. Look, we've all come to know and love 4 Pinocchios when talking about people who have no regards for the facts. Why isn't that enough anymore?
Well, what we found with President Trump is that he has a tendency to double down and continue to make false claims long after they've been debunked. Most politicians would drop a claim once it was tagged with 4 Pinocchios. So in the case of President Trump, there are claims that earn 4 Pinocchios that he has said not once, not twice, but even 120 times. So we felt we needed to signify this in a way that would be memorable for people, and also have it gathered in one place on the Washington Post website where people could refer to it.
Let me play one example of one of these claims that the president repeats again and again and again, even though you've often given him 4 Pinocchios on it. Watch.
We started building our wall. I'm so proud of it. We started. We have 1.6 billion. And we've already started. You saw the pictures yesterday. I said, what a thing of beauty.
So why isn't 4 Pinocchios enough for that?
Well, the problem with building the wall, so to speak, is that Congress has not appropriated funds for the president's wall. They have appropriated $1.6 billion for border security, but that is all fencing or replacement of existing fencing. And the language in the appropriations bill specifically says none of the money can be used on the prototypes, the concrete prototypes that the president has looked at. But he went ahead and just been pretending that he is building the wall, and he isn't.
So what's the process? What gets you? What criteria do you have to reach to get the bottomless Pinocchio?
It has to be a claim that we've rated with either 4 Pinocchios or 3, a mostly false claim, that has been repeated 20 or more times. And with our beginning of this web page, we came up with 14 claims made by the president. There are a couple others that are close behind. They're only at like 15 or 16 repetitions. But once they reach 20, we'll add them to the list.
And is anyone else besides President Trump even close to receiving a bottomless Pinocchio?
Not at this moment. We've pondered about this, going back in time, if we had this before, would someone have qualified? Obviously, a president's words are scrutinized more closely than other politicians. We have a continuous record of everything he has said. So, but at the moment, I can't think of anyone contemporaneously who would qualify.
And again, I think it's going back to the beginning here of why this is important. You note that when a politician is fact-checking and called out for dishonesty or for a falsehood, they typically stop. That's not what's happening here. What does that tell you? When something that is not true keeps getting repeated, what does that tell you?
Well, we look upon these claims as a form of disinformation. Clearly, the president at this point realizes that what he's saying is not true, but he wants to go ahead and still say it. And these claims fit certain categories. They're claims where he exaggerates about his accomplishments, or he brushes aside or tries to cover up his disappointments, or he's attacking someone that he perceives as an enemy. Those are the broad categories that you can see that these claims fall into.
No, and I think that's the important distinction there. Saying something wrong or incorrect or not true is one thing. Saying something that you know to be wrong or untrue or a lie again and again and again and again is something different and merits a different standard. Let me just put up on the screen some of the claims that the president has repeated. You note the biggest tax cut in history is not true. He said that 123 times. The trade deficit 117 times. The U.S. economy has never been stronger 99 times. Inflating our NATO spending 87 times. Wow. The U.S. has started building the border wall 86 times. This is not incidental. This is not once or twice slipping up in saying the wrong thing. This is a pattern. It seems almost systemic, Glenn.
Well, it is certainly part of his political character. And I should note that, we don't try to play gotcha at the Washington Post. If we find a politician has made a mistake, an error, and they come back to us and say, you're right, that was an error, we don't actually award Pinocchios. Well, we will still do a fact check because people may have heard what they said. But there's some politicians that are readily able and willing to say, I went too far there. And that's not really the case with the president.
No, you guys are relentlessly fair about this. You don't go out of your way to award them unless you think they were said with cause. Just to be clear, is this bottomless as in a bottomless pit of Pinocchios or a Pinocchio who's only wearing a top?
Well, what I like, people were saying it should be a new drink in bars here in Washington, the bottomless Pinocchio, though I'm not sure what exactly would go into it.
I like that better. Your version of it is the best possible one. Glenn Kessler, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it. Allison?
I don't want to think about Pinocchio with no pants, but thank you for planting that.
Well, I want the drink. The drink is much
good.
better.
I will buy you that.
Or wings.
All right. Meanwhile, we have to get to this shocking story. There are newly released documents that will take us inside the mind of the Sandy Hook killer. What they show us about the years that led up to that massacre that destroyed so many lives. This morning, we're learning disturbing new details about the tortured mind of the Sandy Hook killer. More than 1,000 pages of documents have just been released by Connecticut State Police. CNN's Jean Casares has been studying this and reporting on it and joins us now with more. What have you learned?
It's very difficult to even talk about this, right, in light of what happened, but it allows us to go into his mind, his mindset in the years prior. These documents and writings of the Sandy Hook shooter, Adam Lanza, have never been made public until now. The Hartford Courant was able to obtain over 1,000 documents from the Connecticut State Police after a 5-year legal battle eventually decided by the state Supreme Court. The documents included Lanza's own writings, along with assessments from mental health professionals prior to December 2012, when Lanza shot and killed 20 first graders and 6 educators at Sandy Hook Elementary School after shooting his own mother to death. While we knew the 20-year-old had led a life of isolation, we now know that Lanza was evaluated in 2006, 6 years before the mass shooting by Robert King, a professor of child psychiatry at the Yale Child Study Center. According to the newspaper's reporting, King asked him if there were kids that he enjoyed spending time with. A 14-year-old Lanza replied, "Why would that be significant?" According to the doctor's notes, he appeared pale, gaunt, awkward, standing rigidly with his eyes downcast, declining to shake hands, tremulous with discomfort, and looking miserable. Dr. King's report stated, in part, it was difficult to interpret what this increasing social withdrawal and reclusiveness represents, but stated that his homebound education was a mistake. Many of Lanza's writings, according to The Current, were not dated. But at one point, he wrote a list of his problems. That's his handwriting right there, including the lights were too bright, there were too many dirty dishes, and referring to his mother, you were in the room while I was in the kitchen. I am unable to distinguish between my problems, he wrote, because I have too many. At another point, he writes in what appears to be an online communication with a fellow gamer, I incessantly have nothing other than scorn for humanity. I have been desperate to feel anything positive for someone for my entire life. And recovered from his computer was a spreadsheet that Lanza put together for over 4 years, from 2006 through 2010, detailing mass killings all the way back to 1786. According to The Current, there was great detailing of these mass murders by Lanza, and the killings were arranged by how many people were murdered.
Oh, my God.
Allison.
Jean, oh, my God. I mean, to know that there were all of these red flags, it's just all so sickening. And, of course, heartbreaking to know that he was, in his own weird way, attempting to reach out to people, and how it could all have been missed or not attended to.
And it talks about his mother responding to the professional's report, saying, oh, it was just he was nervous being with the psychiatrist assessing him, and that was just that. And we'll have a plan for him to get into regular school later on in the college years.
Oh, my gosh. Just when you think it can't get more horrible, that story. Jean, thank you very much for the reporting.
I really hate to think about the families of the victims reading that news this morning. All right, a source tells CNN the president sees impeachment as a real possibility, even as Republicans in the Senate shrugging all of the revelations off. Big developments coming up next.